Well, the other used to be like, roads are stupid. We should get rid of all of them. You're better off with your golf courses.
Well, if you listen to some of those, you can all we can have is faster.
Are you sure? Okay.
There's where we can make some money. Start up a roundabout training. Roundabout training. We're all there. Now we know how to go through.
How are you? Good. Good.
I've got a lot of that's yours.
Yeah, that's right. No worries.
As soon as I picked it up, I'm like, that's not mine. So I've got to go to Philadelphia the afternoon, and I'll be there for a week.
Oh, really?
Yes, work related.
Okay.
So I plan on doing Valley Forge and a few of those
Nice. That'll be nice.
while I'm there.
Nothing like having your radio in the car, throwing it up when you want to.
Well, I've got the shelf in the van. I've got a full station in the van.
Wow. Nice. George, I saw him out in the bar.
Yeah.
And he's right there. But he's got, you probably saw the last couple presentations he did, where he uses those electric fence stakes, the ones that have the point on the bottom, and he just runs that line all the way down. That's like awesome. That's awesome. I thought when he showed us that, where he runs his radio underneath that line, so it's like a straight vertical for NVIS. Never thought of that.
Wow.
Never thought of that. Yeah. Hey, George. Well, he's reading us. But yeah, he's got a lot of great ideas. A lot of great ideas.
I've got a little printed circuit board with the Toro and everything on it. You can buy them on eBay for $20. That is the InFed halfway. 49 to 1 barrel and one, and you can use it to rack your leads up there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start playing with that.
You showed me that little power supply. Remember the amplifier?
Yes.
That you built? That looked cool. That looked really cool.
I've been using the bigger one because I built the tuner into the big one.
Oh, you did?
All right, before we get started
Yeah, I built it right
here, Pat is here. KD8QOL, KD8NQK, N8DRD.
Apparently that's-
KD8LJ.
No.
Anybody here waiting for a field day T-shirt? I did Amira, I got one for you. Anybody else? All right. All right. We'll go ahead and get started this evening. Ken Dorsey, who was going to give the presentation on hashtag hotline, and VoIP is actually ill. He called me about an hour before I left the house. So we're going to have a slight change of plans this evening. I'm going to give two small presentations, one on RF safety to do your required RF safety calculations, and the other one on the history of U.S. telephone numbers.
Awesome.
So something a little different. But we'll kick off with our normal business. We'll do introductions. Jason McCormick, NADI, I'm the president. We'll start over here with Steph.
November 8th was Ravel Stephan, vice president.
Julian November, WATB, Jeff, treasurer. WADLM, Eric. ABAW, Zeke.
KD8 JJF Lane.
Whiskey 8, Mike Papa Golf, Jim. Student skippers, no.
KD8 UVP.
UVP.
UV, Uniform Victor.
All right. November 1 Echo Zulu, George. Shoot, Miriam.
Kilo Echo, Quebec Golf Kilo. I got it!
Woohoo! Yeah, Miriam. Woohoo!
My name is Mark on QFA, Sarah Hospital, sir.
I'm Dick, WAAPYG, very young guy.
I'm Gail, and I'm visitor.
All right.
Kilo Echo 8, Victor Bravo Sierra.
Yay.
Mike Delta Bob.
Kilo Alpha 8, Lima Yankee Mike, Ed.
Kilo Delta 8, Tango Quebec uniform, like in Doylestown.
KEAQFT,
The Gate GMF, Gary Wooster.
KD8LNK Ron,
Aaron, KE8LBA.
KE8DLB Randy.
Mindy's wife, right?
That's my wife.
KD8BYT, Russ from Akron, I'm the secretary.
Say that again.
Secretary.
I'm Chris, Whiskey 5, Victor Oscar X-Ray, Victor Oscar X-Ray, Norton, and I'm new to Norton and new to the club, and but not new to amateur radio.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming.
All right. Approval.
Of the clicker?
No, I'm sorry. I was all of a sudden I was worried I didn't put the treasurer's report in the slide. Approval of the previous minutes. I did send those out a little bit late, just yesterday. They look good to me. Anybody have any questions on the
You haven't
minutes?
read them, I have copies.
He's got copies.
Where is Widsworth?
Wisworth.
Wisworth?
Yeah, if you look at the Widsworth Balloon Festival.
Well,
Oh, Wisworth here.
Wait, what?
It's
Oh,
it's
This is a typo.
a typo.
hey, I was in a hurry.
I feel like we'll go with Wisworth.
That was Russ, okay.
Wadsworth.
I was gonna mention it, but I just got out of that job.
You didn't want to pick it up again.
All right, I think you have a motion to approve the minutes.
Eric.
George, second. Doug? Get that, Russ? George,
I heard
Doug?
about 4 names.
George, motion.
George,
Doug, second.
All in favor?
All in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
Who wants to be secretary?
Nay.
All right. Upcoming announcements. Ken was gonna push this, so I don't have all of the details on this, but Summit County Areas is looking for volunteers. If you want to get out and help with the Goodyear Half Marathon, that's Saturday, August 13th from 6 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. It's a good opportunity if you want to get out, do a little bit of public service. Usually the Aries group kind of staffs the mile markers, reports runner status. If they see a medical emergency, they'll call it in to get paramedics, things like that. It's a good time if you want to get out in the fresh air and help out the community and do a little bit of radio while you're at it. You go to summitaries.org to sign up or get in touch with Ken Dorsey. Put on your calendars, the Ohio QSO party is on Saturday, August 27th. This is a 12-hour HF event from 12 noon to midnight. It's a good opportunity to get on the air with HF because people actually want to talk to you for once as a resident of Ohio. Especially if you live in a less populated county, you become quite popular. So put that on your calendar.
I'll be interested.
You should try to operate the Ohio QSO party.
Yeah, you should.
I'm taking my all-star notes, but I'm not taking anything yet.
All right, treasurer's report, Jeff.
All right, we had a lot of activity last month. Statement beginning balance 7271.58. We did have some payments to Power Graphics for Field Day apparel, WooCommerce website upgrade, also headphone monitoring sets and distribution amp for Field Day. Which seemed to work out real well.
We put those to good use.
Yes.
A lot of good items.
Guy stakes, spring clips, and another headset for Field Day is in there. Also the summer picnic shelter deposit and a lifetime achievement award, which you'll hear more about. And then for inflows, next we have the club dues, some inflows from apparel sales. This is kind of a wash for this line item, 150 Field Day hall rental refunded deposit. We have to put an extra 150 down for a deposit for renting the hall. And then also breakfast for Field Day and outlay, and then also from last time, $40 from the 50/50 raffle, leaving an ending balance of $67.95.47.
Nice.
Any questions on the treasurer's report? Motion to approve.
Motion.
Stefan, second. Jeff? Yep. All those in favor?
Aye.
Who wants to be treasurer?
Nay. I said nay. I said no.
All right. This is going to be a pretty short business meeting. Otherwise, there was no executive committee since the last meeting. The executive committee probably won't meet again until September, just with different people's schedules over the summer and no seriously pressing business. Yeah. So probably won't have an executive committee next month either. Technical committee. Some people have asked about this. There was a power outage out at the repeater site July 14th and 15th. A pole actually rotted away on Eastern Road and came down and took down the whole three-phase line and the Spectrum fiber circuit and everything that goes down Eastern Road. And it was a storm night, so of course it took quite a while to repair. And then we had some problems getting the Bridgecom repeater back online after that. The technical committee actually met on Tuesday. We are looking at maybe implementing some basic power alerting to let us know that the repeater is still on battery, because at one point we thought the power had come back on when it hadn't, and there was a pop breaker out at the repeater site. And the other thing is we started discussions on an upgrade of the actual repeater itself, the radios. It's currently running a Bridgecom BCR 50V. Those of you with good speakers and or good hearing, we've had a lot of audio issues with the repeater over the years. And now we're starting to crop up a couple interesting. We've had some occasional transmit radio failures. So we're taking a look at maybe upgrading that. There's been some different proposals thrown out, looking at some Kenwoods for replacement there. No plans on any of that yet, but as I mentioned last month at the club meeting, we do have a pretty healthy cash balance, and the club does want to use that to improve our facilities, and an investment in replacing the 2-meter radio portion of the repeater is probably at the top of the list of the priorities for that. So it's obviously not a urgent project by any means, because the system does work, but we are looking at an upgrade to get a little bit better audio quality, a little bit more reliable performance out of it. So any questions on the tech committee? All right, operating committee report. We did have our field day at the end of June. Many of you were out there. From a score perspective, we did end up with 389 contacts. Our QSO score was 1266. We hit 8 of the bonus achievements, which ended up getting us 1210 in the bonus points department. And we just squeaked by on the QSO points on the bonus points for a total score of 2476. And this is just a look at where the contacts were made. We did quite a bit of work on FT8 between Lane. I think you were doing FT8, and Jeff did some FT8. Javen did some FT8, and Javen, of course, was doing some CW, and had some other people on there. So good mix of contacts. Ken did persevere and made a couple 10-meter phone contacts, so did that pretty well. We did have a nice turnout, not as big as in past years with field day. We did have, although we did having a little bit less of a crowd than mentioned, we did have at least I think three New Hams or unlicensed people try to make contacts. So either unlicensed. I helped I think he said he was 12. He was interested in ham radio. His parents brought him out. And then I know we had at least 2. One person who was a very new ham, and another one who was a long time inactive ham. returning to the hobby. So we had at least 3 people who got on the air that way. And we also had 3 youth youth who made at least 1 contact who were under 18. So pretty well-rounded turnout. We had a good time, a lot of good food. Overall, it was a good event.
Yeah.
So, anybody have any other comments or thoughts on field day?
Like I said, I saw the, 2x4s and blankets were being planned for sound isolation, but I didn't see them in the photo.
We didn't really
It didn't
pull
work.
that off.
Yeah.
Put them up, but it didn't work.
Well, we didn't get enough 2x4s and ladders to try it, but even if we did, I don't know that really would have worked. So
I think the
we're probably-
headphones worked a lot, but yeah.
But I think what we're gonna look at for next year is maybe getting those, like you see them on helicopters, they have like those rubber kind of wrap around things that go around the
Right.
microphone.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what we'll try next. Because it's as much about the mic picking up the ambient noise as it really is the operator being able to hear. So,
Just put those ones like the counter.
What headsets did you get?
I don't know, Jeff, what headsets did we have?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the, well, no, when I say headsets, these were headphones. We were using those to plug in Y adapters so that others could listen to
Oh, yeah.
each station. So what we had was headphones. Everybody brought their own headsets.
Yeah, I brought 2 Koss headsets. A couple people, someone had a Heil. There was a couple different things.
Yeah.
And realistically, we haven't had too many complaints about being able to hear. It's more about the mic in the background picking up all of the ambient noise and makes it hard for the others to hear.
I'm surprised on some, like I know the Heil is very, you have that sitting down here and your voice totally blanks any background noise.
Yeah, well, I had the Radio Sport, the top of the line headset that I was using, and that's, the same thing with that, but even having that mic right here, there's enough, because it's all flat walls in there,
Yeah,
and
real
floor and
busy in
ceiling,
there.
there's just enough bouncing around that it still picked it up. It wasn't bad, but you could still hear it.
Yeah, and it's not too bad as long as you have someone who's talking with a strong voice.
Yeah, that's true.
So
That's true.
things we'll have to look at. Any other comments on field day? All right, education committee's on hold. Social activities committee, we do have the family picnic coming up. That's gonna be on Sunday, August 21st. It's gonna be starting at 1 o'clock. We're gonna be at our usual location at Silver Creek Metro Park in the Sherman Shelter. If you're familiar with the Metro Park, it is this is the shelter that's right by the parking lot, up the hill from the beach area, well, I guess what used to be the beach area. I don't know if you can still swim there or not. They're getting rid of all the beaches and the metro parks.
Still there, the lifeguards and stuff aren't, it's closed.
Yeah. So we'll be right there. We are looking for RSVPs, so we know how many people. This is for club members only and their immediate family. But if you could go there at RSVP and let us know how many people are coming, because we do supply a decent meal. Yeah, Fred.
No. Oh, I have an immediate family. Can I bring a friend? Or I gotta marry her for the day?
You can bring a friend.
Yeah, you gotta marry.
Yeah, we're not performing any marriages at the picnics, so.
Jason will marry you.
I think I lack that power. It's just for club members and, close friend or something like that's fine. It's just not open to
The general public.
the general public or anything.
I got my bowling team coming
Cool.
Too much.
too. Only 12, but, okay, $30 a seat.
So, if Gary were here, Gary would remind you about apparel sales coming up, so insert Gary's reminder about apparel sales coming up here. Like I said, this is a short meeting. We'll be back here August 18th for the August meeting. Scott Yonley, NASY, who is the Vice Director of the Great Lakes Division, will be here. He always has a nice kind of State of Ham Radio and State of the ARRL talk that he does, so he'll be here in August. With that, any other topics from the floor, Steph?
Yeah, so for anybody listening online or anybody here, our next test session is coming up rather quickly. It's August 6th, and it's going to be at the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. Is that what it is? Justice Center, Sheriff, Wayne County Justice Center. So that's all the information is available on the website, w8wky.org. And so if you want to upgrade, or anybody who wants to get their license, the lumber guy's wife, maybe, wink, wink. Oh, that's okay. But anyways, yeah, so that's your opportunity. And then you can also see the other dates that are available after that too, as well.
We have, what, 3 more exams coming up, August?
August, October, December. Yeah, yeah. So this is our last 3 of the year. Yeah. No, this one's at the Worcester. Yeah. The last 2 are at the church. Yeah, the last 2.
On W8WOO.org also.
Is it? Okay. Okay, the Woo? Yeah. The Woo.
Anything else from the floor? All right, Russ?
50-50. Anybody else want a 50-50? I haven't sold the winning ticket yet.
Right here.
Oh, somebody back there wants to.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up a topic.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kid Dorsey got my wife and myself to one of these maker fairs.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Familiar with them?
Mhm.
We went to the one in Wayne County a couple months ago. And one thing I noticed there was some of the outfits there were not just showing their wares, but they were recruiting. And I want to thing for him radio to do. Because most of the people there are technical type people that come to these things. And, you know, if they could have a little booth there or something to demonstrate something, they might get some interest. And hey, I got the contact name for it. I passed it on to Gary 4 or 5 weeks ago. He said he sent it to some committee, and I haven't heard anything back, but if interested, I got the contact info and stuff.
Yeah, so that would be under the education committee, which we're kind of rethinking how we've been doing the committee stuff. So it's a good idea. What?
You got the contact information with you?
Yes.
Give it to me after the shoe, and I'll write it down. I did that before with Steve.
Yeah, it's something we'd like to get into. We're trying to figure out a structure that we can organize, get people to go out and do those kind of events. So,
Hey, no 50-50s?
did you get Muriel?
Yes, you are.
Oh, I just said I was going to win.
Oh.
That's all I was saying.
I thought she won the winning ticket.
Are they $1 a ticket?
Is your ticket end in 893?
Oh, you already picked the number?
Let's see. Nobody's hollering, so it might be me.
Uh-oh, there it is. There it is.
That was the person who don't win nothing.
Nice try.
How much is the 50-50, Russ?
I think they put it at $60. So that makes it $30 for me and $30 for the winner.
Gary, what were you? You have a.
$30. Put your hand out. I'll keep it.
The Maker Fair, I talked to the guy by email, and the last one, I believe, was on the same day as Dayton. And he did say that he would consider, he realizes that their interests have converged.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that he would consider trying to keep it away from a major ham event the next year.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
So if someone does talk to him, that was, they put on a pretty good show. It's out Thursday, I assume, when you're talking.
That's Wayne County.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did,
down Smithville.
Yeah, we had a couple at Akron Library.
yeah, I did the first one I did. I put a 20-meter antenna on the library roof, and we made a few contacts.
Nice.
But the last one I did, we did a soldering station. The library had little kits to put together.
Nice.
The kids aren't cheap, I can't afford to buy them myself. And we showed kids how to solder. One kid grabbed his hit with his hand. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and I had information about ham radio and everything set up.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we can look into, but we do need to get the committee structure figured out how we want to deal with that. So.
I think you really got to have the right thing to get it in full.
Right.
I did the soldering thing, got there.
Yeah. I know the ARRL has a bunch of projects like that. They have there's a liaison that helps plan that. And then there's also, Carol, what's her name out at P-Cars?
I know who you're going to say. I
Yeah,
don't
I
remember.
can't think of her last name, but she has a whole youth program for things like that, so. So we there are resources available, we need to get organized to start doing some of those kind of activities.
Cool.
I don't think the library will let you get back up on the roof again now that I'm retired.
No, probably not.
They probably didn't want you on there when you worked there.
I got up on the right, then I went up to the fourth floor, out the door in a flat spot, set up 20-meter antenna on a tripod.
Did you ask permission?
Yeah.
Nice.
That's probably the only boat that would say yes in that.
You need a key to get up there, they had to let me out there.
Any other topics? Anything else from the floor? All right, motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Stefan, second. Muriel wants us out of here, all right? All those in favor for adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Who wants to be president?
Someone's gonna want to be president next March.
You.
No, I said this to my last year. Short of it. He's not here, let's nominate him. Yeah, I'm sure Gary would love that.
Oh, no, he wouldn't.
So, all right, so as I mentioned, Ken Dorsey, he's sick, he was gonna do Ham Tech Hall, I think we're gonna have that in October, I gotta look, or no. So I gotta look at the schedule again, but he's gonna do that later this month. So I'm gonna go back into the archives. One, this is something I've never given to Sarah.
Back in the
I actually
archives.
did this for work, when we were doing COVID, lunch and learns as a way to keep people talking about stuff. And then the second one, I'll give a short talk. I gave it last year on RF exposure safety. Because that's really important. That's a topic we don't spend enough time on. And you have about a year now left until you have to actually evaluate your existing stations under the FCC's rules. So we'll go through both of those this evening. So the first one, talk a little bit about, this is kind of an interesting topic because it kind of grows out of how telegraphs were originally functioning. And it deals with telephone numbers, which have some interesting parallels to call signs. Plus, it's just an interesting topic. So, and since Ken wasn't able to make it, you're stuck with what I have available.
Thank you.
So, so this is kind of a brief look at telephones. So if you're familiar with some of these, all phone connections originally were hand patched by operators, and hand patched literally meant, and this is where the phrase patch cord comes from, or patch cable. It was a little short cord where you would ring the operator, they would say, hello, who do you want to talk to? And they would plug the patch cord between two jacks on the phone switch, and they would patch you in. So that's where patch cord, patch cable, patch you in, that's where all those telephone patch, that's where all of those terms come from. These are most often women who are also called the hello girls. Phone stations would all be given a number, usually 4 digits, but could be 5 in certain dense metropolitan areas. And everything was organized as your center or your exchange. We'll get to what that means in a minute. But if you wanted to call outside of where you lived, outside of what your local exchange was, you had to give the city
Mhm.
and the phone number you wanted to contact, and then the operator would call the next operator, would call the next operator, and they would patch together a phone call between different phone companies. But this was all done by hand. So, some interesting statistics. In 1910, so about 110 years ago, there were 7 million telephone subscribers in the United States. That was the highest by far in the world at the time. And using 4 and 5 digit numbers wasn't working very well. And even back then, they had started working on automatic telephone switching. These were big, I think I have a picture of one of these. These were huge electromechanical rotors that would spin, and then there was all these latches, and they would all bounce back and forth to make a connection. And so they were starting to replace human operators, but to make a long distance call, which probably all of us are familiar with what a long distance call was. I gave this to a bunch of 20-something coworkers who had to explain what a long distance telephone call was to them. And interestingly, at the time they were working on this, it was considered too hard for the average citizen to memorize a 7-digit phone number. So I'm not sure who that's a commentary on, but I thought that was interesting. Probably some of you had a phone number that was in what was called the 2-letter and 5-number system. That kind of persisted into the 40s. We'll talk about it in a minute. Which was like the song Pennsylvania 6500 or 65,000 was for the Pennsylvania Station Exchange in New York. I Love Lucy, her phone number was MU 59975 for Murray Hill. But in practice, other than the memorization, this was always mapped to 7-digit phone numbers, which is where the origins of the letters on all of the numbers started. Because people apparently couldn't remember 7 digits.
Right.
They could remember 2 letters and 5 digits. So what happens is there comes this thing called the North American Numbering Plan. This is where this is the phone system that we use today. It was developed back in the early 1940s. It was developed at Bell Labs, which was the research unit of AT&T, and they developed a system with the phone numbers that we have today. So there's 3 segments to a phone number, which we all dial 10 digits today, but that was not obviously always the case. But you have your area code, or what's properly called your NAA. You have your exchange code, NXX, and you have your station ID. And these were geography. So we all know what an area code is, right? I mean,
Right.
In Akron, you have 330 and 234. The exchange code now doesn't mean a whole lot, but even as recently as 10 years ago, your exchange code was tied to a geographical location.
Right.
And then you had a station ID. So this is actually my cell phone number, which I'm from Pennsylvania. And one of the unique aspects of this is if you had a phone from 10 years ago and got a cell phone, your cell phone number is probably related to the last place you lived. So I have an area code 724, which is Western Pennsylvania. The exchange code 553 is the non-existent town of Crider's Corners, Pennsylvania, which was the name of the exchange that never existed as an actual town. And then my station ID is 8087. So the United States was originally divided up into 86 areas. And each area had a 3-digit number. Most states only had 1 code for the entire state, but the most populous states received multiple codes. So Ohio actually had 4. We had 216, 614, 419, and 513. Obviously, all of those exist today with many other area codes layered on top of them. And then there's an interesting trick, and this is how you can tell if the area code is the original one or the exchange is an original one. So area codes, no area code exchange no area code had a number in the middle that wasn't 0 or 1, and no exchange code had a middle number that was 0 and 1. So in Cleveland, for example, you had the Northeast Ohio, you had the 216 area code. The middle number is a 0 or 1, so you knew that was an area code, and there would be no number in area code 216 that would have the middle digit as a 0 or a 1. And that's how the electromechanical switch knew if you dialed an area code, or if you dialed a 10-digit number for an area code, or you dialed a 7-digit number for a local phone call. So that was really interesting. And then additionally, for international dialing, no phone numbers start with a 0 or a 1, because 0 is operator, and 1 is the prefix for international calling. So then exchanges were the next thing they divided up. So all area codes were divided into exchanges. And this was largely synonymous with what was called your rate center, which was important for billing. So again, if you remember back in the day, you had local calls that were free, and then you had toll calls that may or may not be more expensive than long distance calls. And you had that big section in the phone book where you had to figure out, okay, is this a toll call or is this a long distance? You know, again, explaining this to the 20-somethings that I work with fascinating, which is a fascinating endeavor in itself. But each exchange had a name, and one or more exchange codes or NXXs existed within one exchange. Interestingly, exchange names, and I find this fascinating working for the power company because we have some of the same things. The exchange names have no reasonable relationship to the common name of the area and are tied normally to interesting geographic locations, streets, some geographic feature. They just had random names. So, as I mentioned before, my exchange code is for Kreider's Corners, which is a really old name for literally an intersection that had a village store in the 1800s in Western Pennsylvania. Now, Kreider's Corners hasn't existed as a thing for 150 years, except in the land of telephone numbers. Each exchange was given 10,000 numbers, and they were all given to one company. And if they ran out of those 10,000 numbers, then they got another 10,000 numbers. And there was no number portability. So if you moved, you got a new number wherever you moved to. Yeah.
Is this presentation after? There's a certain point in time when we used to, for instance, my parents used to have a phone number that said started with Blackstone, blank.
Yeah, those were phased out by like the late 50s, early 60s, but that was before, that was the common mnemonic even after they adopted this. Some of the places that didn't have their numbers changed, they still used.
Okay.
Yep.
I figured this was after that era.
Yeah, well, this was starting the phase out of that era. But some of the places that didn't get different numbers, like some of the major cities kept that number, like so they didn't have to change the mnemonic, and people used that, you know, up until the 60s.
BL was changed to what would correspond on the dial, what B and what L would correspond.
Thank you.
And then the little digit, like, it was Blackthorn 5, for instance, would become BL5, or what did it, whatever's on the dial.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting when they used to tell, well, our number is Blackstone, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in the background, it would always map to a number. So the phone number would have, so Blackstone was probably BL, and then the rest of the number. So it would have been 3, or it would have been 2, what L, 5, 4?
It was actually 259.
Yeah, 25. Yeah, 25.
Was our
So
number.
right. So it would have been written Blackstone, capital BL, lowercase, the rest of Blackstone,
Yeah.
and then the rest of the numbers. So that's how they remembered the numbers.
I was just going to say, in our area, in the Cleveland area growing up, They beat the number into our head. Garfield 12323. Garfield 12323.
Aluminum siding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy Buck.
So,
There you go.
yeah, so a lot of places that didn't have to change those numbers kept the mnemonics, and that just got mapped on top of the number. So central offices, these are the key organizing principle of phone networks. This was actually an older style phone patch. This wasn't one of the earliest ones, but you can see all the plug boards there. This is a more modern looking one. It looks like a data center. Central offices originally were physical locations where all of the telephone lines came into one building. Like even today, you see, especially in towns and cities, you see like a red brick or a tan brick, like concrete building with no windows and a fence around it and a bunch of wires going into it. That's the telephone exchange. Yeah.
Yeah, in 55, I lived in a town of 180 people. The switchboard, very similar to that, was in a house.
Yeah.
Nice. That was Sarah.
How long does it call after 9? 'Cause
Yeah.
If you didn't call someone on your party line, she had to patch you together even in town.
That was Sarah from
Like I
Andy
said, we didn't
Griffith.
have any of these numbers you're talking about. Within the town, it was 3 long and short or whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
You know,
Can I interject just one other thing? I won't even mention the hardwire fence telephone system.
yeah, we use that too.
But in New York City, since we're on the central office thing, they had a central office. It had more than one exchange.
Yeah.
I read about this on the internet a few times, but, this thing caught fire. There was a fire that originated down in the cable wall, traveled up through the risers to like, there was three or four floors of equipment.
That was in the 70s.
And
Yeah, 70s,
Just
yeah.
about burnt the whole thing down. Now, they salvaged what they could, they cleaned up a lot of stuff, but they bought in equipment and the personnel to rewire everything. And, you know, they had that up within 2 weeks.
Yeah. There's actually
10 days. I'll say 2 weeks to be conservative. Within 2 weeks, they had the whole thing back up and running.
Right.
And this was in Manhattan.
Yeah, there's actually, AT&T had made a documentary about that. I think that was in the 70s.
Damn, I was, yeah.
Yeah, they made a documentary, and it's on YouTube now.
Yeah.
Well,
You can watch
anyhow,
the AT&T documentary.
anyone interested, just Google New York Central Office fire,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty sure that video popped up right there too.
Yep.
It's really interesting. The work that was done.
Yeah. So today, central offices in general don't exist. Your cell phone doesn't have a central office other than it's a theoretical concept that's still used today. As I mentioned, where your exchanges, where your phone was, there was no port number. I'm not going to explain what cold call. Well, this is all word of this audience. So this is an example of a map. This one shows an overlay of 2 different areas. These were if you look at this map, these are the service area exchanges. So here's Crider's Corner, where my phone number was. I grew up in Meridian, which had its own central office. Each one of these was a different exchange. And if you moved across the line, you lost your telephone number. Sometimes even within the area, you could lose it. Yeah.
That's pretty close to Butler.
Huh?
You were close to Butler.
I grew up in Butler. I went to Butler High School.
Good town, man. I got some friends. Right by Slippery Rock, where they wrong.
Yeah. I grew up in Butler. My parents still live there. My one brother still lives there. Yep. So dialing. So mechanical switches were controlled by voice pulses, and this is why everyone had a rotary phone. When you dialed,
I love those
when
phones.
you dialed the rotor, it sent a set of pulses along the phone line, and the pulses going along the phone line creates the mechanical signaling to the phone switch that would cause the phone switch to connect your call. The numbers were assigned based on the number of pulses needed to dial. So in area codes, the biggest cities received area codes with the fewest number of pulses. And then you could pay the phone company for your phone number to be an at the time, it wasn't as much about the memorable phone number as you wanted a short dialing phone number. So that's why something like a phone number like ending in 2000 was very unpopular, but 2111 would have been very popular because it was a very short dial. So an example, New York was assigned area code 212, which was only 5 pulses. Cleveland got 216, which was 9. Pittsburgh got 412, which was 7. And so interestingly, as a little short trivia, the shortest possible number was the shortest possible number at the time would have been 212, 221, 1111. So,
It's in DC, so.
huh?
That's in DC, so.
No, New York City. DC's 202.
Okay.
They didn't like DC. They didn't like DC. That's why it got a 0.
I'm just getting used to hang up.
And that's why Alaska got 907,
Yeah.
because.
Yeah, there's no one out there.
In half a day dialing.
Yeah. Let's see here. Within your area code, all dialing was 7 digits. This is stuff you guys all do. Again, this was stuff I had to explain to 20-somethings who've never heard of any of these things. If you dial outside of North America, you dial still today, you dial 011, and that was the code to activate the phone switch to give you an international operator. If you call overseas today, you still dial 011. And the first direct dialing for nationwide long distance was in 1951, and only between select areas. So why do we have all the area codes we do today? Telephones, of course, took off. We were more popular than even Bell Labs thought they would. Area code 216 was split in 1996 into 216, 330, and 440. If you did a split, everyone retained their 7-digit number, and then they received a new area code, so you can still dial 7 digits within your area. This was unpopular for nationwide businesses who ended up having to reprint all of their stationery and bills and invoices, all those kind of things. And so eventually, what they ended up doing was just doing overlays. So if you live in Akron now, you know that 234 was overlaid on 330 in October of 2000, which forced everybody in 330 to start dialing 10 digits. So that's why you can still, I think there's a few rural places out west where you can still do 7-digit dialing, but there's not too many of them left.
That was it, the AT&T breakup. There it is.
I don't know what happened, that's why.
Kind of like what actually happened. They were no more.
Something happened. So local number portability, this got mandated in the late 90s. This is how everyone got their phone number out of their house phone onto a cell phone. So as I mentioned before, in modern times, your phone number has become a marker in your life, generally where you lived when you got your first cell phone. So my daughter has a Pennsylvania phone number, just like my wife and I. You know, I work with people who have moved all over the United States. They have all kind of stuff. Gary, I know your phone number is still Philadelphia, 717, right?
Yeah, close.
Yeah.
Eastern Pennsylvania.
East Pennsylvania.
I got this number in Willoughby Mentor in the late 90s. I've moved to North Carolina. I've moved to Texas. I'm back in Norton. I still have a 440.
440 now, yep.
So, in Alaska, Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the ladies who works for me, she has a number from, is it Pensacola or Tampa, Florida. She hasn't lived there in 20 years. And
It's like the ham radio call sign numbers, they're everywhere now.
right.
When they used to be geographically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Local number portability as well as hand call region portability.
Yeah.
Everything's portable.
Everything's portable.
So, that's it.
That's it.
So that's a randomly brief history of telephone.
So next time, are you going to talk about the Captain Crunch whistle and how the black at Apple computers?
I can explain how that works, but it doesn't work that way anymore.
No, I know it doesn't. And the black box is what started Apple computers. And that was from Steve Jobs. That was from his mouth. When he and Woz made the black box, he said without the black box, they never been an Apple computer company.
Can I piggyback something on your?
Sure. I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing me talk, so go for it.
On YouTube, there are some, if you're into this kind of thing, I mean, if you like hearing, HF and things like that, some of the phone freaks back in the day, Captain Crunch and those other guys, particularly Evan Doorbell.
Right, doorbell, yeah.
Collected hours upon hours upon hours of the sounds of the old analog phone system, which no longer exists. And Evan Doorbell himself narrated all of these trips that he and his friends made and recorded off payphones, off house phones, off through different types of relays and different types of switchers and different exchange systems and things like that. His videos are on YouTube. Again, it's Evan Doorbell. That's one thing, and he has them all listed. Oh, here's what we did when we were in Virginia in 1969, and we were calling over a 5x5 crossbar system to Long Island. So that's one thing. And the other is I found someone had captured on a wire recorder about 1951 the sound of somebody making a couple of operator-assisted phone calls. So to hear what it actually sounded like in the operator-assisted days, someone got it on a wire recorder and saved it all these years. That's on YouTube as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
Don't know what to tell you to look for, but wire recording, telephone operator, something like that. But it's really
And they have demo videos of those electromechanical crossbar switches. It's
great.
It's an oddball topic, but the amount of engineering that went into the U.S. phone system is unimaginable.
Yeah.
And it used to be up until after the Cold War that there was reliability requirements on all of these central offices where they had to maintain enough power to run the phone system for 4 days, something like that.
Yeah.
They all had innocent cell backups.
Right. And that's why your original phone wasn't allowed to have a wall, like a port. Now today, even if you have a house phone, it has an electric port for wireless. All of the phones were required to be powered off of the phone line itself.
Right. I think it was 48 volts, wasn't it?
48 volts, yeah. 48 volts. That's where 48 volts AC came from.
Yeah.
It was like 90 when it rained too.
Yeah. Yes, I've experienced that too.
That'll burn you. Yeah. And the other thing too was on the old rotary phones, because we had a rotary phone for years and years and years. If you took it off the handset, you could actually dial a number by clicking the actual hang-up receiver. If you dialed the pulse of the number you wanted, you could dial through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Downtown Akron, I worked at the main exchange down there, and they wanted to add on to it. And the original walls and everything in that building was like 60 inches thick.
Wow.
Bomb-proof. They had to be bomb-proof. Yep.
Wow.
We had that in the utility space too. Like buildings had to be bomb-proof. Mark had his hand up.
Yeah, Jason, I remember, my mom had one of the styrofoam, but it was on the wall.
Yeah, a little alcove, a little table. Yeah.
And if you dial that too quick, you'll get the wrong number and somehow.
Yeah, or if you stopped it. If you stopped
if you stopped it, yeah.
Yeah, you gotta wait until it stopped before you.
Yeah.
Then you go way back to SARA and the candlestick phone when Andy Griffith, that was the actual operators that would.
Yeah, Fred.
This used to be some classic, like it's no longer. They had what they called the automatic voice memo. This was for the military, and it went through, of course, a lot of commercial civilian telephone exchanges. That's why a lot of the old exchange, I believe Medina's still like this. They're made in brick, there's no windows, and there's usually signs around a restricted area, right? Anyhow, this system was built like, you got a trunk, let's say, going from Medina. Let's say there's an Air Force base in Indiana, right? This would go through the civilian switches, etc., right? as much as possible would be underground. And they tried their hardest to make it, nuclear bomb proof. Now, this system no longer exists. You can look this up on the internet, automatic voice network, but it would tie in. Well, I used to call from overseas. I could talk to anywhere in the U.S. It would tie in all the military bases in the U.S. and even some in Canada. Sometimes I'd have to go through the Canadian operator to get to Norfolk, to get them to patch me through to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, for instance. Yeah, that's another thing. Now they have what they call Federal Telephone System, FTS. And when I was in Europe and we were using it, the boss always told us, hey, FTS doesn't stand for free telephone.
Yeah.
But every time they would figure out a way to block us, we'd figure a way around them,
I just loved it when I was growing.
To our friends at the British Exchange, maybe they could help us or whatever.
When I was growing up, I know it's not part of it, but I used to just love dialing the time, like all the time. Everywhere I would go, I would call the time. At the tone, the time will be.
Well, it's like listening to WWV.
Yeah, yeah.
One more, then we'll go into the topic.
I just want to say quickly, first of all, that was really interesting for you to just do that on the fly. That was very interesting. And
It's-
the second-
If you haven't figured out, I'm a huge nerd.
Yes. Welcome.
And secondly, this seems like a great group for me to ask this question. Why would my phone cut out every time I'm by Avenue? Does anybody know if they have a?
Are you talking about a cell phone?
Yeah.
It's probably RF, yeah, so,
You're either interfered with or there's a shadow in the cell.
right,
tower.
right.
In
Right.
that whole area, if I cross that line, in the Avenue area, my phone cuts out automatically.
Who's your carrier?
Walmart, straight talk.
Yeah, so what you probably have to do is figure out who Straight Talk goes through, because they're what's called an MVNO, a mobile virtual network operator. So it's gonna be one of AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile.
Yeah.
Figure out which one they're on and find a tower map. And I'll bet you in that area, there's either a down
dead
tower
zone.
or a missing tower, or right where you are is shaded by like. Because in Akron, the towers are on the outside of the city. So all the towers are up on like Spring Hill and what's the other side over by like where Chapel Hill Mall is?
Right.
If you're downtown and you look out, you'll see all the towers actually ring the city because Akron's down in the valley.
I knew I was in the right place to ask that.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that was it.
what time is it?
It is 8:00 exactly,
All right, so this one will be about the same length.
or 2000 if you.
And I want to talk about RF exposure assessments. We talked about this last year. But this really is an important topic that doesn't get enough coverage in amateur radio. So I do want to give a disclaimer. I am not an RF engineer. I don't speak for the FCC. The club doesn't speak for the FCC. Yada, yada, yada. You've been so informed. What's still important about at this point for us, after May 3rd, 2023, so if you have modified your station in any way, regardless of what you modified, you're required to be clear, if you change your radio feed line antenna, like if you add a CW key, you don't do this, but if you change one of the major features of your station, power, amp, radio, feed line, antenna type, you have to do an RF assessment of your station, period. If you've made no changes, you have to have one on file. You don't have to file it. You have to have one done that you possess after May 3rd of 2023. Is the FCC going to come?
Next door. That was
Okay.
next door.
Is the FCC going to come beating down your door asking for your paperwork? Probably not. But if you interfere with somebody, this is going to become a tool in their toolbox to deal with. And also, it really honestly is the right thing to do. So one of the things that gets asked about, there's this concept of controlled or occupational exposure, and the other one is called general population or uncontrolled exposure. I'm not going to read the definition. You can read the definition. These slides are actually up on the club website from last year. But key points for hands. Regardless of what you read on the internet or anybody's armchair lawyering on the internet, you are the only person who can be fully aware of the potential exposure and controls the exposure at your house, your station, wherever you're operating. If your family, even informed of risks in your operating schedule, and they can't leave the area, right, they are not able to exercise control over their exposure. So this comes into play a lot with commercial sites, which is where these terms came from. At a commercial site, the occupational exposure is going to be controlled by a fence, signage, locked doors, things like that, right? Unless you're putting up a fence and locked door around your shack and around every antenna, you don't have controlled exposure except for yourself because you're the one who's controlling the radio. So the general population or uncontrolled exposure, and how ham should consider this, is you should consider everyone to be general population or uncontrolled exposure. And you have to remember that this is not about a physical barrier to anything unless you've built a lead shielded bunker to protect your house, right? Invisible boundaries such as property lines or non-RF containing structures like walls, apartments, fences, etc. If it's anywhere where the general public, and remember, that's everybody but you, can be near or crosses and doesn't provide alternative control, that has to be uncontrolled exposure. So again, unless you can let them turn it off, or you won't literally physically secure the area, that is uncontrolled exposure. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this. This does not mean that like you can never operate on your property with your radio when there's anybody else around. The distances are not big, right? It really comes into play when you have to think about where is my antenna, right? So what is exposure? So exposure is the distance based on any part of the antenna to any part of the body. So here we have a little person here on the ground. You've got another person up here in the window, and you have to measure the exposure from the closest element of the antenna to the closest element of the person. So here and here, you're measuring from their head, right, up to the edge of the antenna. Now, there's an exception to this. So any radiation that's closer than 2070 or so, about that wide, has to have SAR tested. This is what your cell phones go through. This is what all HTs have to start going through in the new rules. That's why you're starting to see a lot of companies roll over their HTs to do models because they have to have a model with an SAR testing. So does this make sense about what the exposure means? So the FCC exposure assessment, so it used to be that amateur radio was exempted by license class for the most part. There was some exceptions to the exceptions, but by and large, if you were a ham radio operator, you care about this, but you weren't regulatorily required to care about it. With the new rules that got passed, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, you were made to care. The categorical exemption for ham radio was removed, and you have to perform at least a minimal calculation. I would argue that it's good that that restriction was removed, because this really is, an important topic if you're talking about a close quarter situation where you're operating all the time, right? It's one thing if someone walks past an antenna once in a while, but if you're in an apartment, if you're in close quarters, this becomes a whole lot more important to think about. So there is still an exemption process that's based on a combination of frequency, effective radiated power, and distance of people. It will be almost as much work to figure that out as to actually do the calculation itself. So in most cases, it actually behooves you to do the calculation rather than to apply the exception. So the ARRL has a calculator. I actually didn't like the ARRL's one, so I actually wrote my own that walks you through each step. There's a link on the club website that you can go to. You can go do a walkthrough of each step, and then at the end, you'll actually be able to print off your report straight away that you can file away. There's a couple ways to do it. But the important thing you have to think about is what's called system gains and losses. So what you have to figure out is what's called your effective radiated power. So if you have a modern HF radio, its output power is listed as 100 watts, right? If you have a mobile 2-meter radio in your car or at home, its listed output power is probably 50 watts. If it's UHF, 30 watts or 35 watts, those are kind of the standards. That is not, though, what your effective radiated power is, because you have to take more in mind. So your radio puts out a particular amount of power. So in this case, we're going to say it's 100 watts, right? You have to then subtract, so your feed line causes loss of power. So you have to subtract the amount of loss from your feed line, and then you have to add, or subtract if you were a bad antenna, but you have to add what your gain of your antenna is. So if you've ever gone shopping for an antenna or you've read about antennas, they're always talking about gain. How much gain does this have? Does this have gain in a particular direction? Gain basically is an efficiency that allows your antenna to radiate more power than what your radio puts out electrically. So we're going to step through a calculation of this. I'll skip that for math warnings. So here's a practical example. So if I have I used to have an ID 4100 in my car. It was a transmit power, 50 watts. I put 144 megahertz, but let's say I was transmitting into 390 meters, right? I have from my house, I'm sorry, this is what I had in my house. That's also another place. From my house, I have a 50-foot section of LMR 400 that goes out to an antenna. So you have to look up the manufacturer of the cable type, and you'll get a loss per 100 feet. Or if it's European cable, you get a loss per 100 meters, and you got to figure it out. So in my case, the loss for 50 feet is half, 1.8, so half of that, so it's 0.6 dB loss. And then, so that's the amount of power then that's arriving at my antenna. And I'm not going to walk through the math. That's the math. If you use a calculator, the calculator performs all the math in the background for you. But in this setup, when my radio signal reaches the antenna, so I have a Diamond V2000A on the end of my garage. The Diamond V2000A is receiving 43.65 watts of power. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then I go look at my antenna. So here's the specifications of the Diamond V2000A. Its gain and it's a tri-bander, so I look at the right gain. So its gain, I wish this worked on the TV. Its gain for 2 meters is 6.2 dB. So my 2-meter gain over this antenna is 6.2. So this is an efficient antenna that will enhance the radiation from my transmission. Because remember back here, what gets to the antenna is 43.5 watts, right? So you can find lots of lookup tables to estimate these, but if you can find the model of your antenna, just use the actual manufacturer specs. So this is looking at the ARRL's calculator. So I know the power of my antenna, so I put in the 43.5 watts. I'm running FM, so FM is 100% duty cycle. What that means is when you're keyed down, you're always transmitting power. So if you're using single sideband on HF, for example, the power transmitted fluctuates based on your voice. So the louder you talk, the more you talk, there's more power being used to send that. Any mode with a carrier, CW, or not CW, like RIDI, FM, is 100% duty cycle because you're always transmitting power whenever you key down. So you have to then kind of figure out, well, how often do I transmit and how often do I receive? So if you want to check in the nets, for example, you may transmit for 2 minutes and then you may listen for 5 minutes, right? You pick a reasonable value in there. So I enter my antenna gain, which is what I got in the last step, and then my operating frequency. So 147.990, that's the input frequency of SARA's repeater, and I get a calculation. So this will give you, the distance that people have to be kept away from my antenna to be considered safe from RF radiation burns. So for the controlled environment, which again is you, the minimum safe distance is 3.7 feet, right? So 3 feet, what, 8 inches, I guess 8, 9 inches that would be, or 1.1 meters. For the uncontrolled environment, this is everybody else in your life, the minimum safe distance is 8.1 feet, or 2.5 meters, essentially 2.5 meters, right? So we're not talking about huge distances. It's not like you have to keep people away for 100 feet in each direction. But it is important when you start to think about the shape of your antenna. If you think about like an inverted V, for example, or a G5RV, or something where a radiating element is close to the ground, or close to your house, or close to your neighbor's house, things like that. That's when you have to start thinking about these types of calculations. I'm not gonna go. Oh, is that it? Again, this talks a lot. I forgot what that was. That was the last slide. So I was going to do a demo of the walkthrough exposure calculator. So this is something you're going to start seeing is that handhelds are going to now be subject to the same emission rules that cell phones are, which is probably a good thing. For example, I know I don't really want a foul fan glued to my head all the time, but it is creating an interesting situation for the handset makers. And I think you're going to start to see some turnover in those markets. So I know that was 50,000-foot view of a complicated topic. Any questions? I was going to do a walkthrough of the step-by-step calculator. Yeah, George.
I loop 70 feet, a peak line 68 feet, into a 41 gallon and a dual ports 1-to-1 choke. Okay, about 12, 15 feet of LMR 400.
Yeah.
The balance outside, there's nobody comes near it. Like, would the hazard be nil on my HF?
You'd have to do the calculation, but probably, right? So you have to think about it from the concept of anything that's radiating, right? So in general, a coax line should not be radiating. Now, obviously, there's some antenna designs where the coax is designed to radiate on purpose, and you got to consider that. Like a G5RV, for example, where you have like that section of ladder line that hangs down. That ladder line is part of the antenna that's radiating, right? Theoretically, anything after a ballon should not be radiating. That's the point of the ballon, so to speak. But you do have to know what your antenna is doing. Sure? So if you have an antenna with like a load element, a loading element, or a load tail or a coil, all of that has to be considered in going back to this of all of this is what's the closest radiating element, right? Like if you have a vertical antenna, I have a gap titan, right? The gap titan's on a 10-foot pole, but I have the parasitic elements that hang down right over top of the pole. right? So my closest radiation isn't the top or the middle of the antenna, it's the lowest slope of the radiant element that hangs down off of that pole.
Isn't there some type of exception for mobile units that operating out of a car?
That has not been, as far as I know, that has not been really clarified. It's supposed to be no, but I don't know that anyone knows how to do it.
I think I thought I read something on it, because you look at a lot of people's cars with VHF, UHF,
Yeah.
you're gonna be too close.
I think it turned into the, that's an interesting problem sort of situation. So I don't know if there's an official rulemaking on, we're not gonna worry about that, because that affects not just hams, but, you know, police, fire, EMS, you know, all those kind of things. I don't know exactly what the rules are. On the flip side though, a mobile antenna is not very efficient. So you're actually losing even more power, and so that distance is gonna get shorter and shorter. So.
Does the time that someone would be in proximity of the antenna have a lot to do?
Yes, if you really dig down into the regs, there is a time-based exposure, like for like an office complex where people are, for how many minutes they're in an area, those kind of things. The problem with that for ham radio is that gets so complicated that it's just easier to assume that situation doesn't exist.
But on the mobile, is what I'm thinking, you're not gonna be in one place very long, exposing an individual for very long.
Except people in your car, for example. And that's why mobile is such a complicated, that's an even more complicated topic. And that's where, like, yeah, there's some theories on time averaging that no one's close enough for the time averaging except the people in the car, but then the people in the car actually fall into controlled exposure. Like, that's where it gets kind of vague. Yeah.
So the antenna in the middle of the yard is not gonna have people around it unless you got a picnic table or something next to it.
Right.
So it'd be incidental exposure?
Well, I mean, it would still be uncontrolled exposure, right? But again, an HF antenna in the middle of your yard, you're only talking about, I mean, if you're running a full legal limit amp, it's a lot larger, but if you're talking about like 100 watts on a wire, you're talking about 10 feet, something like that.
Yeah. It's very minimal.
I recall that the, different frequencies have a major influence on that calculation. And which one is worse? I recall it was 2 meters.
2 meters is the worst. So yeah, so the calculation does change based on the level of frequency. So when you get to like if you're doing a multi-band HF antenna, you always pick the highest frequency you're going to transmit on that antenna because that has more absorption than a low frequency. So for example, I have a 7-band gap Titan, right? So whenever I do my exposure calculation, I do my exposure calculation for the top end of 10 meters because that's the highest frequency that I'll ever transmit. But if you're in mobile, when you cross, I want to say it's like 120 megahertz or something like that. I can't remember where the line is. The absorption rate changes because of the wave, and then it changes again before you get to 70 centimeters, and then it changes again when you get above something, 400 or 550. Like the calculation changes over time. So that's what the calculators take all those different things into account, what the band range where the frequency falls into it. So.
You only have to do for a multi-band antenna, you only have to do it for the highest frequency?
As long as that's representative of what you use the antenna for, yeah. Like if you have a 7-band vertical or a tri-band fan dipole, all in the HF range, then the SARA calculation is the highest at the highest frequency. So if you have like an 80-40-20 fan dipole, you can just calculate the 20 because that's going to be the longest exposure distance. I think, did you have a question?
No, his question's with your mind.
Okay. Gary?
Well, the fan dipole's not necessarily true, depending on how it's outlaid. The 40 meter may be a lot closer to the ground than the 20 meter, although if it's an emergency situation. That has to all be taken into account theoretically.
Yeah, but again, it's easier to just The difference though in that is going to be so small, and it's not that you don't necessarily have, it's not the fact that the 10-meter radiation won't come off the 40-meter element. It can, so it's easier to just calculate one value for the whole.
But you would use the 40-meter length on the high frequency calculation.
You would use the 40-meter length when you're calculating this. Right, when you look at what your uncontrolled distance for B or C is, you would use the 40-meter length, but the 20, if it's like an 80-40-20, you'd use the 20-meter frequency.
Can
with
you?
the 40-meter length, or the 80-meter length.
You know, whatever your bands are.
Right, but that goes back to exposure distance. I mean, that's why the rules are essentially, the exposure distance is any distance from any part of the antenna to any part of the body.
Can you show us your calculator?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, so we're gonna try a live demo, because that always goes really well.
Yeah, sure. Where's it at on the site, by the way?
It's under operating.
Operating? Okay. Because I want to share that link online. There it is. All right, cool.
So, all right, so the way I set this up is you actually have you can do two things. You can do a quick calculation if you know all the math in the background, or you can do a fully assisted walkthrough. So we're going to start with the fully assisted walkthrough. So the first thing is to determine your output power. So I'm going to say that we're going to do my ICOM 7300. I'm going to transmit on about 29.99 for 10 minutes. I don't know what the band is.
29.7.
What is it? Yeah. We'll just say 28 meters. This is just, and we'll say that my radio output power is 100 watts. And all of this text will explain what you have to calculate for each step. So then the next step is determining your feed line loss. So let's say that I'm going to do my feed line type is LMR 400. I'm going to measure my feed line in feet. And my feed line out to my gap type is 200 feet. Loss per 100 units of measure. LMR 300 is 0.03 for HF. It doesn't matter. Okay. This is where you would look that value up for the type of feed line you found. So then you're going to ask about your antenna length. So I'm going to say this is a gap Titan. I'm going to just make up something and say it gave 40 so we'll just put that. So then this is where you have to enter your operational characteristics. So let's say I'm doing conversational sideband dependent speech processing. Let's say I'm working a contest and I'm only transmitting every 1 minute and I'm listening every 15 minutes, right? And again, this is where you kind of have to think what you're doing. If your antenna is close to the ground, you want to include ground deflections. Mine's way up in the air, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to say next. And then I will essentially get this as the assessment for my gap Titan. So one of the things I added to this one is it'll show your theoretical ERP. So in this case, if this was all accurate numbers, which it's not, my 100 watt ICOM, my 100 watt ICOM 7300 has a theoretical output of 218 watts. So that's the power of the radio minus the feed line plus the gain given by the antenna. So when I look at my exposure information, so we're looking largely at control exposure, the minimum safe distance is 1.6 feet or half a meter, right? So that's kind of the question about the dipole in your yard. You're not talking about big distances.
So if you're using an amp at 400 plus, you use 400 instead of 100.
Right, well, so we can do that,
Correct.
right? So let's say I bought a full legal limit amp.
Change.
I'm gonna blast through,
No, go ahead.
I'm gonna blast through, so I'll say my output power now is 1,500 watts, right? So now, my theoretical output is 3,280 watts with a full legal limit amp, which then means my control distance now becomes 6 feet. So, but then, so for example, though, if you redid this calculation for a 100-watt repeater station, for example, now you're talking about a distance of 20, 30 feet.
Okay. I did my, because I use the same feed line you have, I did my LMR, my ICOM 9700, because I only have about 60 feet of feed line. Mine is 8.24 feet, because it's FM when I'm doing nets and stuff. Yeah.
Right, so
100%. Yeah.
So 100% duty cycle is gonna increase that, the frequency,
Right.
depending on what frequency you put in there, the frequency is gonna change.
I put our
that.
club repeater. Yeah.
Right, so
Yeah.
since you're in 2 meters, that SAR calculation goes way up because
Right.
of the way the frequency interacts with the body.
Right.
So if you're doing FT8, that would go way up too.
Yeah.
FTA would be 100%.
It's 100%,
But
yeah.
you should essentially model it as 100% duty cycle.
Yeah.
When you're FM or something, it'd be like 20, 30 feet.
Yeah.
That's full duty cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, you could run that easily enough. So if you want to talk about and then with mine, you can actually print the assessment, you'll get a little.
Nice. Beautiful.
printable assessment.
Look at that.
But if you, so we can do a good assessment. So let's say I'm gonna do 147.99. Let's say I bought a UHF amp, I'm gonna do 100, or VHF amp, I'm gonna do 150 watts. Let's say I bought 1 5/8 celiacs. Feet, let's say it's 50 feet, and the loss for heliacs, let's say it's 0.2, right? And then let's say that I have a CommScope commercial 2-meter antenna, and the antenna gain is going to be 14.
See you guys.
And since this is a repeater, I'm going to say FN. And use the difference. So this is really a ratio. So the exact numbers you don't put into your math. It's just a ratio of transmit versus listening. Again, we're way up in the air, so I'm not worried about ground effect calculations. So the minimum safe distance to my 150 watt CommScope antenna becomes 28 feet. So for example, the theoretical ERP of FM with this particular 150 watt configuration with that much of a gain is 3,600 watts effective out. Now, that's what you find at the top of the SARA tower, for example. Not necessarily in someone's house, but if someone's messing around with amplifiers, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you do this calculation, you put
See you,
this
George.
piece of paper on the wall in your shack.
Yep.
Okay. What else are you supposed to do? Or is that it?
That's it. You are required as a license holder to assess your station and retain the record.
Do you, according to that rule, do you have to do every band? Do you have to have one for each band?
You have to have one per station. I mean, for you can assess. I mean, if a commercial.
So do you have to have one for like 20 meter, 40 meter?
You don't.
Hey,
No,
you don't-
you would do the worst. You would do the worst.
The worst one. Okay.
The worst one.
Okay.
Then we kind of come down to 1 per antenna.
Okay.
So you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, for
You
the
could
most,
do it with
for
a
most
sheet and
situations,
you don't
yes,
have to
it would
put a
come down
fence
from
around
under.
No, no, because if you look at the distances are minimal, even on 2
Yeah, like for
meter,
my
it's only 8
station,
feet.
I have a gap
My
tight
tower's 40 feet tall, so
and
it's
an
already.
off-center fed dipole with different feed line types and lengths that are on an AV switch. So I have one for each of those situations. Modeled at 10, actually,
No.
one model at 10 meters because the gap goes up to 10.
You should,
The off-center fed dipole is 2 to 6.
when you get
So
back
I have
home.
that one
go
I have that
to,
one.
And then your VHF.
it's in the video
Well, that one
today,
I've
but here,
calculated for
go
10 and
WAWKY.
6 because it's a different duty cycle. So I calculated for 10
It's right here.
conversational
Go under
SSD.
operating,
With
exposure,
6,
right
I
there.
calculated for
And then
10,
that's his
but
tool.
we
Try it, just plug it in. This is the one he was
7.
doing the walkthrough.
Yeah.
That's quick calculation.
Yeah.
Right.
I won't, but I wrote a program for you.
And it's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so do that and just get your printout and print it out and be done. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do mine for each bank just so I have it. Just so I have it.
And then I do have a 2-meter full 40.
Do that one too.
On the eve of the house.
Well,
You'll need to
yeah,
do that,
and
so
we can
it's,
help out with
you know,
questions. I mean, so
it's
the
in the
official
proximity
position
of
of the
bedroom,
club
so
is we're not going to.
You'll need to do that, too.
assessment for you.
You have to have
We
your HF
will
and your.
answer questions if you have.
No,
No, I will not.
that's the joy of ham radio is doing it yourself.
If you pay someone, then they take on the liability.
Right.
So I will tell you for work, for our emergency HF stations, the cost for a professional HF evaluation for a single wire dipole is $1,000.
There you go. I'll do it for you, Randy.
Per station.
This is something like Parks on the Air guys technically should have for their setup when they go out.
Yeah.
Go somewhere with them.
And it's done every time.
Not you. Different Parks on the Air guys.
But yeah, I mean, this really does come into play if you're doing portable operations, parks on the air, those kind of things, or if you're setting up in a public place like for field day. So that's why we set up the field day way out in the back so that no one's cruising around. And we even, if I take people on a tour, we even keep people away from the end of the inverted V because, you know, you're still talking about 4 or 5 feet.
Yeah.
You probably still need to pay for.
To be 100% compliant,
I
yes,
mean,
you would need to pay.
You always try to get, well, maybe you don't, but most people try to get reporters out and something, and if the reporter asks you about this, you know.
I would love to meet that reporter that understands our explosion. But yes,
We've had some ask some strange questions.
but yes, from the precise letter of the law, you should have at least an exposure. You should have an exposure calculation of the setup you're operating. It doesn't have to be necessarily for that particular location, but as long as you're using the same radio, power, feed line length, antenna type, the same mast, the same setup.
I still gotta get my flagpole on.
Put that 12 T's in there.
Yeah. I still gotta get my flagpole antenna up. I took a whole week off and then everything hit the fan that week. Our washer and dryer died. We hit it.
I have yet to set my station up.
I know, because we were just this week, I was trying to.
My parents live with us and my dad is just had a pacemaker installed, so
Yeah.
I assume I'm gonna have to be cognizant or aware of what type of antenna I put up, where I put it up.
Yeah.
Where it is in relation to their in-law suite.
Yeah.
and things
Yeah.
like that.
So I have the same situation at home. The guest room where my parents come to stay often.
Pacemakers are funny things.
Is about 15 feet out a window from an old satellite mast that I repurposed and I put my big diamond X700 25-foot mast that actually runs one of the local APRS IDs. So it transmits all the time. So I actually ran this calculation before I hauled that X700 up there to make sure I wasn't going to radiate my parents while they slept on.
And see, he's got it with all the duty cycles. You just pick which duty cycle you're running, like PSK, you know, and you guys would fall under. For FT8, you'd fall under. So you got to make sure you do one for SSB, digital, and 2-meter full 40, and then you're good. One sheet per. Since he said it's not banned, compliant, complicit.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be the same thing as ban? Would you pick the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
No, because they're going to want to know.
That's really about understanding your environment.
Because HF is a different beast, they're going to want to know that you have your HF assessment. Yeah. Yeah, so if you do your FT8, yeah. But you'll still need, like I said, the 2-meter full force.
No, like any point of any radiating portion of the antenna.
And besides, it's fun, right?
If the coax is loaded and it's
a nice
expected
tool.
to radiate.
It is a great tool.
part of the
He did that, he programmed
then
it all.
yes, if it's just.
And it prints out a nice assessment.
Because I have very
Yeah, but the coax is okay if it's this feed line, and if it's buried, it's not radiating. I mean, I guess it could be radiating, but it's radiating into the ground. But I'm talking about like they have like the G5RB where the ladder line radiates, or there's like I think it's a Carolina Wyndham where they're using the coax as a loading point for some of the
Oh, really?
for some of the RF energy. If the coax is being used as a radiating
I had a friend of mine that had
then that would
one right across the top of
Or-
South
or
Portage
ladder
Lakes,
line.
not a G5RB, but
Ladder
a
line's a whole
different.
different-
Yeah,
whole different.
I have some that just are.
he's still alive, but I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I know.
Any other questions on this?
No. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Hope you enjoyed
Woo!
PowerPoint and put it on a flash drive. Can you write it on your thing?
Right, what? What do you mean, you present with my laptop?
All right, see you on August 6th.
But other programs are more important.
Oh, yeah, I gotta look at the rest of the schedule. All right, have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, Jason.
They get